Welcome back to IGN at Gamescom. Now, joining me to discuss Darksiders Genesis is Airship Syndicate's Billy Garrettson. So tell me, for all the folks at home who are unaware, what is Darksiders Genesis?
Darksiders Genesis is the next installment in the Darksiders franchise. It's actually a prequel to the entire thing. We like to call it like the Rogue One to Star Wars, but in the Darksiders universe, because the events of Darksiders Genesis lead right up to the beginning of Darksiders 1. It's a great injection point for like new players to the series, but also fans who have played the other ones are going to get a lot of kind of, I guess, context and fill in all the blanks of the things that led up to the apocalypse.
So we have to do a little bit of a clarification here because when I first saw the game, the isometric camera angle, the kind of medieval aesthetic, it all just pointed to action RPG in my mind, but it's not as much as it is an isometric action game, correct? So what is happening in this game in terms of loot, in terms of progression, things like that?
Sure, so this is a Darksiders game. It's not just a dungeon crawler, hack and slash, go to one room, clear the enemies, go to another room, clear the enemies. The three pillars of Darksiders have always been combat, puzzle solving, and exploration, and all those are on display in Genesis. Yeah, we have kind of every Darksiders game has taken a risk. You know, Darksiders 2 from 1 kind of changed the structure of the game and it became open, and 3 from 2 was also a lot more kind of focused on kind of single encounter combat. And so it's kind of in the nature of a Darksiders game to have a different spin or some sort of big risk. And so our take on that is we just came off of developing Battle Chasers Night War, which is a dungeon crawler, turn-based RPG. And so we kind of developed all these world building skills from that game. And we said, well, what can we do with that skill set in the Darksiders universe with a real-time action model? And so it kind of started from there. But it was never meant to be a different type of game. It was always a Darksiders game. So there's platforming, there is exploration. There's so many secret and side areas that are basically your rewards for exploration. So again, it's not just a straightforward combat game.
One of my favorite things about an isometric camera angle in any game is the idea that you're forcing players to look at the ground, and I think that is really, really good when it comes to combat and telegraphs, having to dodge things. So tell me about the combat and how it differs from conventional Darksiders games.
Well, that's a great point. Like, from this fixed camera angle, it means that we can do things that you really couldn't do effectively from the other camera systems in the other games, right? So that's right. We have a lot more abilities on display, and this game is a lot more about managing up close encounters with War's moveset, and then ranged abilities with Strife's moveset. And yeah, so we are able to kind of like communicate. I mean, being the UX guy, right? It's all about giving you feedback to let you know when you're doing well and what to do next and when to dodge and stuff. And so you're right in that we're able to telegraph things to the player that get them. Basically, it rewards them for paying attention and then having the reflexes to kind of maneuver around the combat encounters.
Which feels really good when you can pull it off. So you mentioned Strife, you mentioned War. Those are the two playable classes at launch.
Yeah.
Tease, maybe. We'll see. Anyway, but...
Not saying anything.
So tell me about how they differ in terms of play style. You mentioned range, you mentioned melee,
well,
what else?
This is the first time you've ever been able to play as Strife, right? So Strife has been in the other games in some capacity, either teased or actually in the storyline of Darksiders 3, for instance. But this is the first time that you've actually been able to play as him. And it's very much his game. So War's along for the ride, and War does have some growth, but it's really kind of Strife's injection point. And Strife, he's a very different character. He asks a lot of questions. He questions the motivations of the Charred Council and why the Horsemen are having to do all these things. I won't say too much because it's got a really good story and I don't want to spoil anything. But the combat side of how Strife plays in it, he's a gun wielder, right? But not exclusively. He does have blades for up-close encounters, but he is spec'd more to be able to kind of control the battle from the peripheral, right? But if I could say, this game... It's one thing to say that this game is a single-player or co-op game, but regardless of what mode you're playing, it's a two-character game.
Gotcha.
So War and Strife are constantly in the mix the whole way through, whether you're playing solo or with a friend. Yeah, and I want to say that the flow of the game is really about kind of choosing which character to use, not just for encounters, but also puzzles, because each one has their own unique gear abilities as well, and that's where the puzzles come in. You use gear to solve puzzles in order to progress through the main game, or find a bunch of side content.
Let's talk about those. Let's talk about the puzzles and the platforming. In terms of complexity, what are we looking at here? Is this like Myst Or is this a little bit faster than that, or maybe a little bit more exploration and mobility based?
I'd say there's definitely logic puzzles, right? Fans of the series, we have some returning puzzle elements. For instance, we have like these bomb growths. They're like bombs that you can pick up that are kind of on the ground, and then you throw them, and then they kind of stick to the wall, and you can kind of create these organic kind of chain combos so that when one blows up, it kind of triggers the next one, triggers the next one. So we have certain puzzles that are very freeform, where it's like, hey, yeah, of course you have to blow this thing up, but how you do it is kind of up to you, what configuration you've managed, and it's not always the same. And that's what's really fun about the way we've approached co-op. This isn't just a game that you can switch between single player co-op play, and it's pretty much the same layout. We've actually tailored the combat encounters as well as the puzzles to change based on which mode you're playing. So you're not going to see the same puzzles in co-op the way that you see in single player, right? And that's because we wanted to make sure that regardless of what mode you're playing this game in, you're having the most fun and getting, I guess, the most out of your shared gear sets.
Right.
Yeah.
In terms of co-op and kind of forcing both players to be on the screen at the same time, or at least jumping between them, does that lend itself to like any really, really bespoke co-op mechanics, like things that you can only do with 2 players or 2 characters?
Right. Well, aside from those puzzles that I described that could only be solved with 2 players,
right.
We do incentivize. I guess we have a mechanic. It's called synergy, and so when you're playing in proximity, it's almost like brothers being back to back.
Yeah, sure.
We gamified that by basically giving you a little bit of a meter, and once that meter is full, you do get to pull off essentially like a very, very powerful special ability that is unique to synergy, and each character has their own, and it kind of does kind of a screen clearing effect. So it's a good like get out of trouble mechanic.
Sure. Talk me through the full suite of combat, from kind of the basic attacks, moving on to like the really, really heavy hitting stuff like the chaos.
Right. So fans of the series are gonna like feel right at home with this. Like War from this in Darksiders Genesis feels like War from Darksiders 1. We wanted to retain his feel. And all the Darksiders games feature wrath abilities. So those are kind of like your special moves that consume wrath power. And over the game, you do find upgrades that increase your wrath meter so that you can pull off more at a time before you deplete all your meter. But both characters have their own wrath power. So all of kind of War's abilities are kind of meant to increase his capabilities up close, while Strife's wrath abilities are really tailored for like a lot of rerouting and deception, and kind of like, again, controlling the battle from the exterior. For instance, he could drop a shadow clone of himself that stands in place and basically acts as a turret, while then he can maneuver around the enemy and hit him from the other side. And in terms of other abilities, we do have the chaos meter, which is returning from the series.
Yeah.
And War, you're gonna see his familiar chaos form, but Strife, for the first time, we're looking at it right now on screen there. You see that like mecha looking thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Strife's chaos form too.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty OP as well. Like, we're having a lot of fun at the studio right now, tuning it. Like, are we going to make it fun, or are we going to, and flashy, or are we going to make it balanced? And we're kind of like, well, let's maybe let the player have a good time,
Maybe a little bit OP. Yeah, I really like what's happening aesthetically. I always have in the Darksiders franchise. There's kind of this xenomorph, love, death, robots thing happening, and then there's like almost a Balrog thing. We're seeing a little bit of mobility gameplay here.
Sure.
I want to talk about, though, boss mechanics, because the demo that I saw at E3 was spectacular. It was multi-layered. It was intricate. It was kind of this greed,
I'm talking
Blue Goblin,
the Scrooge McDuck guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So talk me through that fight, all the various mechanics, and the layer of complexity.
That boss encounter is the first boss of the game, right? So it's pretty early in the game. So by then, you're still pretty early in your gear capabilities and stuff. So we really focus on combat, but it does test all of your combat, your blocking, your dashing, your meter management, all that stuff. And the way his mechanics work are, he starts off pretty simple enough, and then he'll go into his gold pile and he'll pop up somewhere else. And so if you stay still during this battle, you're going to be in big trouble. You're not going to survive, right? So not only are we training you to be able to move and maneuver around, but as the battle progresses, he keeps summoning magical artifacts, and each one creates a different, I guess, combat challenge for the boss encounter, and by the end of it, it is just absolute mayhem. There's just bullets flying everywhere, and like there's ads coming at you.
Book, there's a giant hammer. The one thing I really liked is the coffin. I love choices in that, so you can choose to destroy the coffin, stop skeletons from spawning, or you can kind of use them as a healing mechanic.
Yeah, you can totally farm those ads.
Let's talk about progression. So we don't necessarily have like loot in a Diablo sense, but there is some kind of progression in Darksiders Genesis.
Yeah, you bet. Aside from, I guess, what fans are expecting, like you can pick up, health stones, wrath stones, abyssal armor, which will permanently increase your health meter and permanently increase your wrath power. Enemies can drop a new thing for the series. They're called creature cores. So every enemy has a unique creature core, and they slot into our skill tree. So when you think of a skill tree, in a lot of other games, all the upgrades on the tree are in fixed positions, right? Now you have choice, right? You can use your skill points to kind of, go through different paths to get to the ones you want. But ultimately, by the end of the game, you've unlocked the tree, and there's nothing dynamic about it, right? Ultimately, there's not like a lot of choice. So we have this philosophy for freedom. We want you to be able to kind of like modify your character capabilities kind of to fit your needs. So imagine a skill tree with a bunch of slots everywhere, and a creature core can fit in a slot, but you get to choose where they go, and then the configuration of creature cores that you put into this tree is kind of up to you. And the creature cores give you unique buffs. So some will do something small, like, hey, they'll increase your attack ability by 1%, right? The more common ones do very small statistical boosts. But there's one in particular. It's the Hellhound. When he drops his creature core, if you socket it into your tree, there's a chance every single time you damage an enemy that you're going to spawn a Hellhound minion that fights on your behalf next to you, right? Which is, again, a first for the series. We've never really had kind of like support characters and things like that, and it fundamentally changes how you play the game.
Well, that's interesting, because that feels like it would be, kind of analogous to a legendary effect in another game like that. We're running a little bit short on time, but I do want to talk about horse combat. You mentioned it earlier to me. It's something you're revealing at Gamescom. Tell me about it.
Yeah, you bet. So the level is not the dungeons are not the only exploration areas. The areas that lead into the dungeons are overworld and very open, and during those portions you can summon your horse. So War can summon Ruin, and Strife can summon Mayhem. Is new to the series is Strife's horse, so we get to finally meet Strife's horse. And when you're on horseback, you have new movement capabilities, and you have a custom combat set, right? So there's a melee and a ranged attack that both horsemen can use, and there are horseback-specific combat encounters. There's some really exciting ones that I won't spoil today, but trust me, the horse factors into this game in a big way.
Fantastic. Billy, thank you so much for giving us a look at Darksiders Genesis. You can find out more about Darksiders Genesis on IGN, but don't go anywhere. We've got Dark Crystal coming up on IGN at Gamescom now. Stick around.